This is the Content Strategy Insights Podcast, episode number 208. Creating digital products is a team sport. Some of those teams are bigger than others, and some are just one person. Both content and UX practitioners often find themselves in roles where they are the lone practitioner of their craft. Leah Buley and Joe Natoli have both been there. They've recently updated their book, The UX Team of One, which emphasizes pragmatic methods and shows how human-centered UX insights can create the most value for an organization.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights Podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 208 of the Content Strategy Insights Podcast. I am really delighted today to welcome to the show Leah Buley and Joe Natoli. They're the co-authors of the second edition of the book, The UX Team of One, published by Rosenfeld Media. So welcome, Leah and Joe. You're the co-authors of the book, but I know you do other things as well. So Leah, tell the folks a little bit more about what you're up to these days.
We'll be happy to, and thanks so much for having us here today, Larry. So let's see, I'm a kind of UX industry veteran. I would say I've been around making websites, actually, believe it or not, since the last century. And I started out a long time ago as a front-end engineer, and then a sort of self-taught UX designer, which is how the book came to be, the first edition. More recently, and for about the last decade, I've been focusing pretty intensely on research. So I currently lead a consumer insights and UX research practice at a startup called Lovevery.
Oh, nice. Well, welcome. And Joe, what are you up to these days?
Thanks for having me. First of all, greatly appreciated. I'm a UX consultant. I've been working in product design and UX for like the last, 35 years of my life. Spent a majority of the last, maybe decade teaching online as well as consulting and writing, having an opportunity to write wonderful books like this. 350,000 students at this point. I have to say that out loud because I've decided I'm going to start celebrating my successes finally at this age. And that's where I spend a lot of my time. UX 365 Academy is my own training site, but there's a lot that comes my way that excites me, and when this is a perfect example. When Rosenfeld approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to be involved in it?" When I found out what book it is, I was like, yes. Like, I don't even want to hear the rest of the sentence. The answer is yes. And I'll figure out how to make it happen, So I'm an ungodly fortunate human being is the nut.
I listened to your podcast with Lou, and you're like, he didn't even finish asking the story was that he didn't even finish asking the question, but we're well, yes, of course.
Pretty much.
But I'd love to back up. Leah, can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the book, the first edition? That was what, 2013 it was published, I believe?
Yep, published, I should say, in 2013. The book came about actually from a conference talk that I did a few years before that, of the same name. And it was really just my reflections on my personal experience as somebody working in-house in small organizations who sort of understood this idea of user experience, but worked with a bunch of people who didn't. The backstory for me is as I mentioned, I was sort of self-taught as a user interface designer, really. And I think I had some successes, but the experience was it was kind of stressful in a way too, because I felt like I spent a lot of time in my own little space, kind of making pictures of screens and drawing boxes and arrows, and in a way, like working out the arguments that I was going to make when I presented these things to my colleagues, sort of like building up a defense. And sometimes, they liked what I created, and sometimes they didn't. But that like feeling of like, I have to convince them why this is the right thing was, didn't necessarily always feel great. And I move along a few years into my career, and I had the opportunity to join a consultancy, one of the really like first user experience consultancies called Adaptive Path, which was in San Francisco and started in the early 2000s. And I just saw there that they were doing a different kind of user experience than the one that I was doing on my own. And it was so much less about making the best design and convincing everybody that it was the best design, and so much more about a participatory process that got clients and team members looking at and thinking critically about the user experience together, and then put customers into the mix so people could really see how it played out. And there was just like better outcomes that came from that. And once I saw what that looked like, I realized, my gosh, if I had known any of these things when I was in-house on my own, I think I could have been a lot more satisfied in my work, but also more successful on behalf of the companies that I was working for. So this book was really my attempt to like turn what I was doing and seeing an adaptive path into these kind of micro practices that somebody in a small place without a lot of resources, without a lot of, sort of quote unquote allies could do successfully on their own. And that was sort of what the book was about.
Yeah, no, and for folks who don't know, because I go back to that era as well. Adaptive Path was like one of the premier UX agency. In fact, Jesse James Garrett, there was one who coined it. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. They spearheaded that whole movement. I mean, I can't overestimate the importance of that firm and everybody who worked there. It's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel the same way. I was just like a fangirl who had the opportunity to get to sort of join the party, which was spectacular and so educational. I really feel like that was, it was a really singular, special experience to get to be a part of that.
Well, that story you shared, and we talked a tiny bit about this before we went on the air. Both of you this is a content strategy focused podcast, but it's I don't know the exact demographics of my audience, but I think there's probably equal numbers of people who are firmly in your field, who do content design or that kind of practice. But a lot of people are still, more in like publishing-esque kind of content practices. So I wonder for those folks, maybe Joe, you could kind of ground us in like like how you all define, the two of you, because I think everybody defines it their own way, but how the two of you define and use in the book the idea of the field of UX, how you would describe it.
Well, I want to connect this to content first, because I think that point is important, right? And it gets overlooked a lot. Ever since I was a graphic designer way back in the 80s, okay, content is the linchpin of everything. Otherwise, you're just coming to look at things that are nice to look at. Right? Content is what makes something useful and usable and valuable and desirable in a lot of cases, right? I'm not going to come to a website or open an app or use an enterprise system to look at it. I'm going to use it to access content and data, right? To absorb things or do things or edit or create or one of those things. And it just kind of gets left out of the conversation a lot, I think. So I wanted to make sure that I said that, because I think it's a critical part of everything. User experience as a whole is all those things. I've never seen this as a narrow definition. There are lots of people you'll find online who believe UX is like, well, can you work in Figma? Well, that's an infinitesimal part of user experience. Is everything. I used to tell clients all the time, I still tell clients this, it's how you answer the phone. It's how you answer support calls. It's how well your chatbot responds to input. It's your website. It's your demeanor. It's how you interact with, it's everything. It's never just the stuff on the screen. All right. It's everything. Like my thing in the book, obviously, is I always say it's a value loop. You have users on one side and business on the other side, and both parties have to get value out of whatever happens with that product for the user to use it and the business to care about it.
Yeah, Joe, I'd love it if you could elaborate just a bit on that value UX value loop that you talk about, because I think that's a really it's a good way to, it balances nicely customers and users and the business prerogatives.
Yeah. Well, I always say that, one of the problems with user experience is that the term user is in the title because it skews our focus. And a lot of what you read and see and hear in courses, in conferences, in whatever, talk about the user side, right? We're here to fight for the users. Of course we are. But there's a business who's investing money and time and effort and paying a bunch of people's salaries to develop this product and put it out into the world. The only way a business cares about good UX, cares about improving that product, is if some sort of real bottom line or top line residual value comes to them through use. So people use the thing and the business gets value. Now they have a vested interest in saying, yeah, we're going to throw some more money and a more effort at this to make it better. If that part of the loop isn't satisfied, the business side, that improvement doesn't happen. All right. The product languishes. Good enough is good enough for a long time until people just get fed up and leave. All sorts of things happen as a result of that. And that's been true my entire life. I think that we leave out the business part of the equation at our peril. And one of the amazing things about Leah's first edition of this book is that it hit that squarely on the head. Okay. And I say that as someone who read the book when it came out. And that's why one of the reasons it was so important to be involved in this, because to me, this is the full picture, right? And it's what a lot of things I see miss.
Mm-hmm. Leah, I'd love to go back to that. Like you were at Adaptive Path back then. I love Jesse James Garrett's 5 layers model and Joe's value loop. Did you have sort of a underlying schema or organization idea about UX when you came into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think to be honest, I think my goal with this was to simplify it. I think as a field, we love frameworks. And I mean, I love frameworks as much as anybody. And it's really tempting to create new models for helping people see things. But what I wanted to do was give people something really simple to work with. And so the book itself actually has this kind of 4-part model where it's like, you come in, you kind of, you can assess sort of what you have, you can move into seeing how people are really using that. You then move into a kind of iterative exploration of how to make that better. And then you launch and you sort of reassess. And that's like, there's so many versions of that same model that other people have created too. So you find that in the book as well. But I have to say, and this is maybe a controversial take, but after doing this so many years, I feel like I've gone through my models phase. And at this point,
Amen.
the most impact I find that I have is really by getting in deep with the work itself and figuring out what are we trying to accomplish as a business? Like what is actually, like what are the real legitimate KPIs that someone's going to pay attention to that we think we can change? And then backing our way in from that, like what are we trying to accomplish and how do we get that done? And so even in my research practice now, actually, and I lead a small team of researchers, and we're always trying to communicate our insights into the company. When we feel like we need to start with a framework, I think my inclination sometimes is like we need to make this more concrete. We need to get this more grounded on the actual business goals and what specific steps are actually impeding specific KPIs. And I find that has, in a way, made us more credible partners to every people at every level of the business.
Nice,
So.
Joe.
I'm in violent agreement with all that, seriously, because I mean, like the value loop is an overarching, it's a general principle. It's not a framework to follow by any stretch. I've said multiple times over, I don't know how many years, if I never see another UX process diagram again, as long as I live, I will be tremendously happy. To believe that you can narrow down this process to this wonderfully pristine diagram that makes everything look very ordered and very simple, and try to apply it inside an organization where human beings are involved, messy, emotional, idiosyncratic, politically motivated, financially motivated human beings. I mean, all sorts of things. Okay. It's messy. It's a hell of a lot more messier than that. I'm fully in agreement with Leah, and I'm reiterating this because I think it's tremendously important. Young folks, especially coming into this profession, get very hung up on the fact that like, I have to learn these processes and I have to be able to execute, these frameworks. Wrong. Every day wrong. Every project is different. Every situation is different. Every scenario, from client to client, from project to project, from product to product, right? From place to place where you work, it's always going to be different. There's no one right way. Like Leah just said, the smartest thing to do is to start with what is, right? Mm-hmm. And evaluate what is, what's the reality of this right now?
Yeah, I wonder as you both talk, but is there still a value in those kinds of artifacts as like onboarding materials for people who are new to the profession? Because
in methods, the book is full of methods, right? But those methods, here's again, I know I'm sounding like a fanboy myself, but this is why I signed on. Every single one of those things is practical and does not rely on any sort of perfect conditions to be used, which is why they've stood the test of time, a decade plus on. Now we've adapted some things, of course, but this is the bottom line. You can always do these things and get insight and get answers and be put on the right sort of strategic path. These things transcend trends or frameworks or change even, in my opinion.
Leah, you look like you wanted to say something.
I just think Joe's being really profound, and I'm shaking my head along with it. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I like Joe's emphasis on methods versus frameworks in this instance, because I think a lot of times it's sort of like you come in with an idea of like, okay, we need to do the double diamond from, start to finish. And you could advocate for that strongly with your engineering partners and your product partners and your business partners. And it sort of sounds like you're trying to like lay a lot of work onto a team that needs to move fast. Whereas I think methods are a little bit different because they're sort of about like, what's the situation we find ourselves in right now and what's the best tool to sort of unblock this situation. And it's a slightly more flexible way of working and better aligned with the reality, I think, of a lot of businesses.
Yeah, you mix and match, and even these processes, and I'm pretty sure that Leah would agree, even these processes are flexible.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
There are pieces and parts to everything. It doesn't mean you have to do the thing start to finish. It means you take the pieces that deliver value, right? You're going to be over the target for X amount of time anyway. What you do with it, I think, is a matter of constantly evaluating and reevaluating. You try something, you get some insight, you go forward, and you learn from that. Even if you made a left turn, you should have made a right.
Yeah, and that gets into like the craft of UX, and so there's sort of, and I hear what you're saying about like that focus on methods makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering though, like how that manifests in collaboration, like because none of this happens in isolation, and those methods, and I think in particular like UX research, and you talk about this in the book, like oh that's too expensive, that takes too much time. In those situations, and there's many other examples like that, and I'll just point out that there's many analogous situations for content people as well, that we face similar things, but especially to that point of like, it's too expensive, takes too much time. Are we still at the point where you have to rationalize and justify the time and expense, or are we a little better established at this point?
I mean, I think we'll always be at that point, honestly, because I think there are just different levels of resourcing that organizations find themselves in. And if you're in a place where it's like you're under the gun and you don't have a lot of extra room or time, it's going to be, people will feel that. And I think they'll be less inclined to have a leap of faith on some of this stuff. That's part of the reason for the approach of the book. Honestly, a lot of the methods are themselves sort of designed to be things that can be done either big or little. So even like guerrilla user research or in-house, like testing with your real coworkers as opposed to trying to go out and do like a big recruit. Those are all sort of baked into the philosophy of the UX team of one. I tend to, as a general approach, feel like it's better to do something kind of quick and dirty and scrappy and without like asking for a lot of permission up front and then bring what you found rather than try to sort of make the case and spend all your effort in getting everyone on board for the bigger thing. So that's just a kind of philosophical approach of the book. But I think it will always be the case that you'll have some places where, it's going to be harder to get a buy-on for the big things. So you're going to have to figure out how to do it lean.
Yeah, and that varies from project to project as well. I mean, for larger companies, for example, let's say they have 6 different products. Not all the profit margins on each one of those products is the same. Yeah. So if one of them has a very small margin, you're only going to get so much time over the target to improve it because the investment the company has to make it isn't worth it. It doesn't make sense on paper, and it wouldn't make sense for any of us if we knew the math behind it. So yeah, you're always going to have to speak to that to some degree. But again, we're obviously in agreement. We did this thing together, but I think that you can always go small. And I think you're almost always, to Leah's point, you're almost always better off going small first and seeing what that gets you.
Yeah. And I mean, sorry to cut you off, Joe, but I think to your question, Larry, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned user research as an example of that. And this may just be my bias because this is sort of where I focus, but I do feel like when you're in a situation where the team feels really uncertain about the direction, it is always the case that like the getting something in front of somebody real is an unblocker in an important way. So, there's different places in the process where I think it's like things start to feel a little more optional, but I feel like it always comes back again and again to like talking to real people is like the most powerful tool in your arsenal in that situation.
That's the thing I've learned. Oh, sorry, Joe. Go ahead. Say that again.
No, I just said fastest way out of the gate always.
Mm-hmm. And Leah, you were reminding me of like, I've had probably 20 different UX researchers teach me this lesson over and over again, that like the most powerful thing you can do is just one good quote from like 30 interviews you did or something, and you plop that down in front of the CEO, and all of a sudden, like, oh crap, they don't,
Yeah.
uh, that holds up in your practice as well.
Oh, fully. Yeah. And honestly, even actually after Adaptive Path, I spent some time at Intuit, which Intuit's really interesting. They had a big investment in design thinking in partnership like with Stanford D School or really early on. So it was a really interesting place to be doing a lot of this work. And one of the things that we had executives do actually while I was there was make them sit down and dog food their own software. And so even like it wasn't even a matter of like, go watch a customer do this. It was like, sit down and actually
Here you go.
follow and try to do it. And it wasn't, they didn't even have to hear the quote. It was just like,
Enjoy.
I'm a real person who actually did this myself. And now I understand. So there's so many different variations of this that can be, much lighter, but there's just, you just sit in meetings for so long and you circle in these theoretical arguments with each other for so long and the actual thing you're creating starts to develop this like level of abstraction that you can't see it clearly anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether that's like watching somebody who's new to it use it, or if you're an executive who hasn't touched your product in a really long time, like using it yourself, like anything you can do to sort of break the spell and just like see a thing fresh it's really hard to accomplish actually as a business sometimes, but it is the most powerful thing you can do. I mean,
That's
actually,
also,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, that's delightfully diabolical too, to get them. Joe, do you have any tricks like that? Like, I think of it as like, I was just talking to a friend yesterday about, research jujitsu.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, same kind of thing, right? What Leah just described. I've asked people point blank, well, when's the last time you actually used this as a user? And they're like, well, I haven't. You should. And I think we should do that right now. And also the other thing that I do religiously is I'm a big boxes and arrows guy where especially when I can tell that there are problems, redundancies, obstacles, whatever in a process. I sit people, and it's usually managers, right? Product folks, leads, CEOs, people with strong opinions, who aren't necessarily present. I say, walk me through how somebody uses this. And I usually do it with team people in the room. And I start drawing boxes, arrows. It looks real ordered at first. Nice linear process. Everything makes sense. And then people start volunteering opinions. Well, actually what happens there is that information goes here, and then this person has to do this with it. And as I draw, this wonderful diagram gets so completely convoluted and ugly, and we're running out of room. And we're constantly going back to other parts to draw in additional parts. And now what's happening in the room is that everybody fully realizes just how messy and unordered and undisciplined in some cases this entire process is for anyone who has to use it, and how much wasted effort there is and work, and how many people are involved in the process internally that probably don't need to be. All sorts of things start to show themselves in that diagram. And that's the reason I do it.
Does
this
it end
actually
up
connects really nicely to one of the methods that's in the book, actually, which is the black hat session, which,
Yep.
the idea of this is essentially, you put kind of the experience up on the wall, and you invite everybody who, works on it in a collaborative fashion to just note any single thing about the experience that they think is confusing or unclear, or they've been wondering about. And it's inspired by Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats, actually, where it's a technique where you can actually adopt a number of sort of deliberate points of view to help spur kind of a creative process. But there's something, particularly for the context of like trying to make a product better, that's really powerful about inviting everybody to just express all the secret reservations or sort of like doubts they've had. And it doesn't mean that they all have to be handled, because then that connects to, I think, Joe's really important point about what's ultimately most valuable for the business to be addressing. But at least it creates a safe space for people to talk about how to, what could be better and what we're sort of just really tolerating that doesn't have to be that way.
And that's the right word. Safe is the right word. I mean, I've plenty of times, one of my favorite things is when someone says, that really doesn't work that way. And my favorite thing to do is to hand them the marker, right? And say, okay, walk us through it. Let's do it. All right. Tell me what happens here. What's wrong? When someone makes a face, I've had people make a face when I get to a point in the process, people go, and I'll stop. Okay, what's the face about? You need to tell me. And everybody laughs. It's like, well, at that point, you might as well go make a sandwich. because the system's going to be churning for at least 60 seconds before it shows you anything. I'm like, circle this in red. We'll come back to it. But yeah,
And what
there's nothing better.
I'm going to try
Joe,
to figure out how to add your facial expression to the transcript, Joe.
the eye roll. I would add, and Joe, what Joe's talking about is so valuable because it's helping a team understand how an existing system really works. But if you are a user experience designer or you are a content designer, to actually open up your own work product to that process is such a trust building thing, because it says, I'm not here to poke holes in what we already have, but I have a proposed design. I have a proposed sort of content system or structure or hierarchy. Now, colleagues, like, help me pick this apart and make it better. And that's just inspired from classic design critique, basically, a grit session. But it tells your colleagues, I am not precious about what I created. I'm invested in making this better too, and I need your input to do that. So that's, again, like, very representative of the spirit of the UX.
Let me ask a little bit more about that, because creating that trust and safety within a UX team, or even within like a tight product team. And so there's that kind of scenario. And then earlier we were talking about, like, if you're lucky enough to have the ear of the executives and kind of, getting them to actually use the product, kind of somewhere in between those conceptually, maybe is this more broad cross-functional collaboration that's going on. And are you both successful in creating that trust and safety with, like when you're working with product and engineering and marketing and other folks?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot, actually, on the context of the organization structure. I mean, the goal is to build that trust and safety with all those colleagues, but it happens a lot faster if you're in an organization that has like squad structure, I would say, where there's mutual accountability among those colleagues. It gets harder when it feels more functional and siloed, and you have to first build the relationships to then build the working practices to then have that trust and safety. So I guess I want to be realistic that org structure has an impact here too, but I've seen these methods be successful in both places, and really it's about just creating moments to come together, whether that's a workshop or your morning stand-up, and to sort of invite the input of your cross-functional colleagues into this process, and can be effective in either structure.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll agree with all that. Silos are the most difficult obstacle, without question, because what really needs to be happening. All right. And again, for 3 decades, I've been doing this. I've never seen it any other way. What needs to happen in every situation is that all those people from all those different disciplines, even if you're just talking about, let's say, product, content, there's UX, there's development, there's IT, whatever, all those people really need to be in the room. And they really do need to be working side by side. And quite frankly, let's just take design and development for a second. I hate the whole dual track agile thing where design is ahead of development. And every 2 weeks we get together and share what we've got, and both parties are completely surprised at what they see. It doesn't solve anything. You need people working side by side, checking in with each other multiple times a day to say, look, here's what I'm thinking. I feel like if we do this and try this, this might be our answer. What do you think? And the developer goes, maybe. I've got a module that works very similar to that. It's not quite that, but I could show it to you and maybe we could customize a little bit. And that might get us there in like a week and a half instead of 6 weeks. So now the outcome of that conversation is, all right, let's try it, instead of screwing around for 5 weeks and then finding out, okay, this is not going to work. And then everybody's frustrated. I think that silos are a recipe for opposition in general. So the more people you can get to sort of play in the sandbox with you, and you still need to facilitate, I think the outcome is just infinitely better. Yeah. So Leah's right. The structure of the organization has everything to do with how easy or how difficult that is, because you've got to make people feel safe. You got to make them feel like their voice needs to be heard, because the fact is it does, but people often feel like that's not the case because they're left out of all these conversations.
Yeah, there's so much here. I love both of your approaches to that collaboration and building that trust and safety, and then how you actually do it. And also, you both expressed a lot of pragmatism, which I love too. And you just opened a whole other conversation there, Joe. But we're running close to time. I like to keep these around a half hour. I literally could talk to you two forever. But I would like to wrap up. But before we wrap, is there anything last? And I'll give each of you a chance. If there's anything you want to revisit from the conversation, or just something you really want to make sure we share before we wrap up. Whichever one of you wants to go first.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start us off. I my favorite part of the conversation is the one where we talked about the importance of talking to customers. And I think, the book itself has a kind of a structure where at the end of every chapter, which is, they're packed with methods, we say, if you only do one thing, and that's just to say, like, if you can't do all this, like, start here first. And I think at the highest level, even the book itself, the sort of the philosophy of the book, like, if you only do one thing from this book, it's think about how to get real experiences in front of real people as efficiently and quickly as you can. And that will be, your secret weapon, whether you're a content person or a product person or a UX person or just someone in the business who wants to make things better. So that's my philosophy.
That was the last question I had on my list. So thanks for anticipating that, Leah. Joe, sorry.
Nice. For me, I think they're sort of two parts, but to me, they're kind of the same thing that run through this conversation, that run through the entire book. Okay. Number one is your job as a UXer, as a product designer, if you're a content designer of any sort, content strategist, you don't have to be right. That's not the job. Okay. The job is not to just pull correct answers out of your head. The job is to figure out what needs to be done, right? And how it needs to be done. Just like in terms of UX, it's not necessarily about what people want. It's more about finding out why they want it, in the first place. And because of all that, all the more reason to say that there's never one way to arrive at those answers. So I'll go back to the approach in these pages, which is here are a bunch of ways to get at the truth, to get at reality, to get at what's going on here. Where is the problem really? Or where is it that we're underserving people? Or what could we be giving people that we're not? And there's any number of ways to go about getting it, right? None of them are necessarily the right way, but they all work. They're all things you have in your toolbox to try. And what I hope is that it takes a lot of the pressure off of practitioners that they feel, quite frankly, to be right and to be right really fast. Mm-hmm. You can still move really fast and you can still learn really fast and you can still arrive at the correct answer very fast. But none of that has anything to do with you being omnipotent, right?
Yeah, I think if you just watched LinkedIn all day, you would think that there's a perfect way to do everything. So thanks for setting the record straight, Joe. Hey, one very last thing for if folks want to connect with you or follow you online, what's the best way to connect?
For me, the best place is LinkedIn. So hit me up if you want to chat.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn and quite honestly, I'm not always on there. So if you go to givegoodux.com, you'll find links to all my socials. There's email, there's everything. So there's always a way to find me.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll link to all that and the book link as well. And I'll check in with Lou about a discount code too. But I'll definitely we'll list the book in there. Well, thank you both so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Same. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.